So thank you, everyone, for coming tonight. This is the first budget meeting, budget presentation, and a budget workshop with the Board of Education at E.O. Smith Regional School District 19. Plan for this evening is for, the board has received the first presentation of the budget and the superintendent's recommended budget. The purpose of this evening is just that first glance, as we've talked about, going through the salient points of the presentation. I do have a PowerPoint to lead us along the way a little bit. Again, very grateful for the work of Dr. Krieger and really leaving some helpful breadcrumbs as to the process to help us move along. And over the course of the next 6 weeks or so, we have several meetings to dig into some of the more detailed pieces of the budget. But today we'll talk about a couple of big issues. Being in the middle of a pandemic, those are some of the pieces that I will lift up today, and hopefully take care of any questions that you might have about some pieces within the budget that might seem unusual because of some of the capital surplus items or capital reserve that we did some work with over the summer to as a result of the pandemic and some of the money that was from the 2021 school year, or the 2019-20 school year, I should say. So I am going to get started. I'm going to share. This is always a trick for me. And the mission of the school district has maintained consistency over this year. I think we've chuckled in the beginning of the year that the first year of a superintendent isn't really to come in and make widespread change. It's to listen and to learn and to really assess and talk to stakeholders around what shifts need to happen. When you start your first year in the middle of a pandemic, there's changes that have to occur. And as a result, I think one of the things that E.O. Smith has done a really great job of, and I think the board has supported, is a lifting up of innovation that's occurred over the course of this year, where we can learn what we are doing out of necessity that we know is good and right for kids, and some practices that we can continue. Our vision of the graduate hasn't shifted. Again, I think that this is a great guidepost and a great guide for us. And it's one that we look to often when we're making decisions about any instructional, curricular, or scheduling changes of, how does it help support what the vision of the graduate is. A little bit more detail. Those are all the attributes that we're really hoping that our students will leave E.O. Smith very skilled at, as that will help them move forward into whatever job career they choose, but it will also make them wonderful citizens for the communities that are going to be lucky to have them. I've also included the Board of Ed's guiding principles for equity, diversity, and justice. I adapted it just a little bit, and actually I adapted it to include not just here, but also on all of the postings that we're now putting out for new positions or for anticipated positions, so that anyone looking to come to E.O. Smith and to become a part of our learning community knows and understands what this board and what the administration and the teachers, the staff, community value in the individuals who are in front of our kids every day. So this is just a snapshot of our enrollment this year. Our total enrollment for all of our students, 1249. That does include students who go to magnet schools and to the technical schools, as well as any students who are going to private schools, private Connecticut schools. We have 1124 at E.O. Smith High School, 16 at Star, 15 at Depot, There are 11 students who are outplaced. We have 18 students who go to magnet schools, and then 84 students who we provide transportation for to the tech schools. This is our enrollment by town. We have at least 2 additional students this year who have reached out regarding interest in attending EO from Eastford. We do have a contract with Eastford, and it's nice to see that the letters that the students are writing requesting to attend EO Smith are lovely, and it certainly talks to what their expectations are for their experience at EO. Our demographics update as of right now, and this is for the entire region. So these are all of our students, and again, some of the students who live within our sending districts, but may not necessarily attend EO Smith specifically, but they are our kids, and we are responsible for their education. Those numbers have gone up slightly from the last number that I had available. This is our enrollment. I'm trying to move that out of the way. Our class enrollment has maintained pretty stable, pretty flat, slight increases here and there. This again is an anomaly year as far as the number of students that we actually have physically in the building. It does impact in some ways the choices that they would make for elective classes. You know, if a student is full remote, they may choose to elect classes that are more conducive, potentially less hands-on, less performance-based. But in the big picture, it's been pretty consistent. And one of the things that I do mention and that I think is really important to mention is that it's very appealing that the class size at EO Smith stays within a reasonable range. When we're looking at some of the shifts we're talking about in curriculum development and in our instructional shifts, and shifting the role of the teacher, of the adult in the room, to and the role of the student, shifting the student from being a passive recipient of knowledge to one who's more active and fully engaged in their learning, that requires a smaller student to teacher ratio. And right now, you have nice numbers, and there's a nice ratio where students are able to, and teachers are able to manage the quality and quantity of feedback. That's something that we'll be focused on next year. You know, what kind of feedback are we providing to our students in order to really help them move along the progression in their mastery or their development of content, knowledge, standards, and performance indicators. So again, not a huge fluctuation this year in the population of students at EO Smith at the high school, not in the other programs as far as STAR and our Depot campus. So some of the things that have been, and this is no news flash to you guys, a lot of time that we've spent this year on our roof and skylight replacement in this current budget season. The roof solar project completed. We did at the very beginning of the year shift the dynamic of the academic support space for supporting students and intervening in real time to support them in their development and their performance, academic performance and development of standards. The Depot school security upgrades were completed this year. We had some considerable support from state and federal organizations to support the pandemic situation. So we had about $88,000 in the elementary and secondary school emergency relief fund, as well as the coronavirus relief fund, where we had about $404,000 to use on items such as PPE, technology, all of the devices that we needed to support both an in-person and a remote learning environment for our students, depending on where the families felt it was most safe for their kids to be, and to be able to provide that as well, and support our professional development for teachers so that they were equipped to manage a very quick transition from an in-person learning environment to one that was both in-person and remote. There was a shift in the SRO positions this year based on some feedback that we had received from a petition back in the spring. A lot of work on the part of the Board of Education and the development of the EDJ subcommittee, Equity, Diversity, and Justice Subcommittee, which has done an amazing amount of work in a very short amount of time to really influence change and to support professional learning for teachers around the idea of equity and inclusion in our classrooms. So those positions have shifted. You'll notice that in the budget, but there's some line shifts of what we needed to do to not lose positions not to lose security positions, but for the nature of those positions to shift while this investigation or the analysis of what was really needed at EO to happen. And the budget has had savings and line items that could not be expended due to the pandemic. We're hoping that in the spring that, once things start to open up again, that perhaps, we haven't saved as much money as we did last year on transportation for athletics because we've been able to compete and to send teams to the small number of cooperating schools that were doing sports as well. So it hasn't been a normal year by any means, but it certainly, I think, wasn't as drastic as the spring was, where everything completely shut down. We've tried to do as much as we can and maintain a safe learning environment to keep the school open for as long as we possibly can. And I think that the numbers in the state and in our surrounding region support the fact that things are getting better. Quick summary, the last 5 budgets. And again, all of this information is located in the budget books that just show kind of the ebb and flow, as well as the number of student enrollment. So we're up a little bit. We're up slightly this year from, or we expect or anticipate, project a slight increase in our enrollment for next year. And just some priorities. So this is the piece for me that I think is really important. We want to continue to maintain appropriate offerings and support and ensure success. It's nice to get letters, as I said, from students interested in coming to EO. If we want to recruit and attract students as their school of choice, not just from the surrounding cooperating schools, but from our sending schools, from Ashford, Mansfield, and Willington. We want EO to be their school of choice. So as we're looking at programming and how we look at providing flexible pathways for our kids, which are conversations that we're having now. How are we listening to what our students have to say about what their goals are and providing them opportunity that meets their needs. And part one, you'll hear a little bit as we talk about the tech ed position and the ag ed position, some ways that we can save money, but at the same time boost up what we have to offer students who are interested in going into the tech fields and into agricultural education. We want to maintain adequate and equitable class sizes to support personalized and student-centered approaches to learning. That was, as I just mentioned. We want to make sure that we have the necessary resources to provide professional learning and curriculum development, and to have that in place to continue to build an anti-racist and equity-based learning community. Those are essential to our continued learning in order to meet the needs of our students. There are experiences that, as the nature of who we are, that we don't have, and expertise that we can certainly become more knowledgeable and educated, but it certainly does benefit us and benefit our students and our staff to have qualified experts come in to help lead us through the process of truly becoming anti-racist and equity-based. Continue to build opportunities for students to build leadership skills. We talked a little bit earlier about how nice it is to have students expressing and really providing their voice and their input. So when I am able to meet with students and hear them advocate for a particular re-entry plan. I mentioned to the advisory committee yesterday that, you know, with some of the movements that the state has put forward in their announcements yesterday about vaccines, that really the subcommittee that they've created to talk about reentry, it's time for us to start having conversations, to start gathering data, and really talking about what a transition back to having more students in the building would look like. And they have lots of opinions and lots of ideas, and are more than willing to go out and talk to their peers to continue to kind of feed that piece. And we want to ensure adequate funding of our capital improvements. Particularly the focus continues on the turf field upgrade. And we've talked extensively as we continue our conversation about SROs and security, to make sure that we have appropriate support to further improve the security opportunities for the school, as far as looking at the areas that might need some structural support. Any questions? I'm moving along. I'm talking fast.
You're
It
doing well.
might be the caffeine.
No, you're doing well.
So the other piece is the taking a look at our certified and our salary. We had a 2 point. Actually, that's a misspell for me, or a miss. It's a 2.25 increase. I'll make that correction on the slide. A 2.25 increase for certified, non-certified staff. That includes steps for the non-certified. For the certified staff, as part of their bargaining agreement, steps were not included in the calculation as part of their contract. So we're seeing for certified staff a 1.25% increase. For non-certified, a 5.97% increase. As I talk about in both my letter and in a couple of places in the presentation, I'll revisit this. Part of that has to do with the fact that there was a non-certified individual whose position is an actual position. It's a position that's in place, but it was not budgeted in the 2021 budget, so that was restored into the budget under the uncertified staff. For a total of 2.17% increase on staffing. Benefits, and I may ask Charmaine to jump in on this piece, because we do see a pretty significant increase, where I believe historically last year you saw a pretty good decrease in the benefits. And this year we did see an increase based on claims that was offset. And again, I can't see Charmaine here. Call on Charmaine to reinforce a little bit. I want to say that based on the claims, the percent increase was upwards of 18%. And there was some offsetting of that by the reserve. And so our percent change is a 4.58% change. So our total for salaries and benefits just totaled here. So those combined 2.61% overall. Some shifts in the special education tuition. We're actually we've decreased due to a decrease in the number of students outplaced. This year, our number was up a little higher than was anticipated. At this point, the special ed reserve is pretty robust, so we're in pretty good shape there. But the anticipated tuition for next year is slightly lower than this year's budget, based on the number of students outplaced. And then the excess cost piece, our excess cost stays relatively flat. This just takes you through the calculation for that, and this is the projected reimbursement for the excess cost for special education. Transportation, we've seen a total about a 1.7% increase. We'll be talking about this. There might be some shift in this over the next couple of weeks. So the Ashford Bus Transportation, when this went to press, was a 3% increase. They've come back with a slightly smaller number. I just received their contract. So what they projected originally is slightly lower. I'll be updating that. It's probably about $6,000 less. The Mansfield Bus Contract is based on the proposed contract that has not been accepted yet. So, but the number that they've proposed for this year is a 1.9% increase. And then Willington, Charmaine and I met this week with John Hipsher from M&J to have a conversation about the Willington contract. So we're in the process now of making a couple of changes based on that conversation. So this number will decrease slightly as well, because they're proposing a 1.9, but that still has to go in front of the board for conversation. So right now, this is the proposed increase, and depending on the outcome of the contracts, those might be a little bit lower. We don't see any major changes in special ed transportation as projected by our Director of Special Services, and transportation maintains relatively flat as well. Revenues, we're looking at a small decrease in our ag ed tuition. Understanding that at the point where this was again gone to press, they're still in the process of accepting and reviewing applications for the ag ed program. The Columbia tuition is up slightly, is projected to be up slightly. Special ed is flat. The ag ed grant is projected to come in at the same number as it did this year. And then the interest is slightly lower at $1,000 less, for a projected revenue change of an increase of $219,792. Just a slight increase in our revenue. Town enrollment changes. So this was interesting for someone coming from a non-regional school district, to really look at and understand the impact that the numbers have on our sending towns. And it was something that I took into serious consideration and thought, and we all did, putting the budget together, understanding that that those projections have an impact on the budgets of our sending town schools as well. So just based on the numbers, the number of students is down by 10 students for a 5.1% decrease. Mansfield, it was up by 37 students for a 6.7% increase. And Willington saw a bubble group change coming this year with 30 student change and a 14.9% increase. And I'm going to reference in your budget book just grab that page. We look under the section under budget and enrollment summary, starting on C3, where it shows this information presented in a variety of different ways, including the member town share with enrollment summaries over a year on page C5. And then on page C10, similar to the pro forma that we saw back in December, so a little slightly different, but based on the numbers that we saw that were based on our October 1 enrollment that was included in that December presentation that we had at our retreat. The town contributions as a result of those enrollment changes, Ashford has a decrease of 9.1%. Mansfield is an increase of 2.2. Willington is actually 9.99 or 10%, for a total regional contribution change of up by 1.5%. So some of the deductions, I have to keep moving my little pictures of you guys so I can see the screen. Some of the things that you'll see, some savings and reductions as you work your way through the book, numbers that would that I would think might jump out at you, would be the debt service increase. It was 190,000 this year. The projection for next year was probably around 187, and it was reduced to 123, 160. Based on the fact that we were able to put some surplus from last year into our debt service line as a result of savings because of COVID. So last year when there was a surplus of money, there were some shifts that were made with Sherry Trahan, I want to say in July, and in August then with Charmaine, where some of those dollars were placed into capital reserve, capital IT, you'll see that come up, as well as into our debt service to prepare for the fact that we will be paying debt on our roof replacement and on the photovoltaic program. You'll see the IT equipment reduced from 136 to 32.2. We're funding some of that from the IT surplus. We talked about that last year when we were talking about going to a one-to-one program. So there were surplus funds from last year that were placed in IT capital equipment to supplement for the fact that we would have to be purchasing a little under 300 devices on a year-to-year basis to fund a one-to-one program. And instead of funding the full almost $300,000 that we had put into that surplus account, at this point, I had put in to reduce it by $100,000 and to keep some of that money on reserve and to slowly transition more and more of those devices into the operating budget over the course of 3 years, so that it wasn't a big hit the first year. We have one retirement in AG in Ag Ed that is not filled this year. That gives us a savings and a reduction. That was a conversation that we had with the Ag Ed department as well as with the Tech Ed department. There was also a retirement in Tech Ed. That's a position that we are retaining in the Tech Ed department, but there's a lot of opportunity for us to hire creatively with folks who can support both the Ag Ed side and the Tech Ed side. We had a retirement of a social studies teacher that we can fill at a lower step potentially. A resignation of a world language department head with some potential to fill at a lower step, and the retirement, as I said, of a Tech Ed teacher that potentially could fill at a lower step. So those are some potential savings and reductions as opposed to folks who are earning at the top level. There was a decrease of 119.8 for non-capital equipment and furniture, as well as a movement of our Canvas students data system to another new IT line. So you'll notice a $72,000 line in our IT budget for IT equipment, instructional supplies, district software. That is a result of the software programs and the movement of Canvas from another IT line into this IT line where it's more appropriate based on the fact that it's supporting the software needs of the district. So there's a little bit of movement between those lines to have them appropriately titled. So some substantial costs, our benefits increased, as I talked about earlier. Our non-certified salary lines have gone up as a result of the shift of the SROs. Initially, that was part of purchase services because they were paid through the town. And so when those positions shifted, we had to bring them onto our E.O. Smith payroll in their revised position. And so they were then part of our operating budget under the non-certified salaries. Under certified salaries, you're going to see it's going to look as though there was a 0.6 world language position added. It was actually added last spring after the budget season. And it was offset by hiring other individuals at lower steps to accommodate an increase in enrollment in French. So that was a real instructional need that they foresaw. We included, as I said earlier, a certified counselor to the academic support center so that there was a qualified individual to work with teachers in strategies to accommodate the needs of students both in the classroom and if they needed some individual assistance outside of the classroom in the ASC. And you'll see a new position for a homeschool community liaison to support both the social emotional needs and the academic needs of students who are struggling with coming to school. So one of the things that we talked a lot about in our conversations around first of all, the issues that we've had with COVID and with students attending to both the remote learning environment and for some students who have chosen to be hybrid, but still are challenged with getting to school, a need for a qualified individual, perhaps a social worker or someone with some DCF experience, to be able to support and to go to homes and to work with families on what they may need and to be a liaison for the schools to better understand what the needs of families and the needs of families and students are for students who are struggling to meet academic success. One of the biggest frustrations, I think, for any educator, whether you're an administrator or a teacher in the classroom, is when you know how capable a student is. And when there's something getting in the way of that success and that student's ability to recognize their own potential, then there's something that we need to do about that. So this position was really intended to be another way for us to offer resources to families and for there to be a liaison between the homes and both teachers and the administration. Some substantial costs, we've talked about some of these things. As I said, there was an IA position in the English department that you'll see the purchase services line will look like it's gone up pretty considerably, but that was a real expense this year that wasn't budgeted for in last year's budget. Curriculum writing and professional development, it'll look like a decrease, but the money for the curriculum writing for this year was end of year savings from last year. So there really does need to be, as we look to make sure that our curriculum is meeting the needs of kids, to make sure that we are appropriately funding both the curriculum and our professional development for teachers to really shift the way that shift their roles within the classroom, which is probably one of the biggest challenges for teachers. And then another piece would be social studies sees a pretty significant increase in their book line to support a pilot course, African American, Black, and Puerto Rican Latino course. It would be a state mandate, but we're looking to pilot that 1 year early and to get the materials that we need to do that.
Sure, I have a question.
Sure.
I'll just go back, actually 2 slides. I was on mute and I couldn't get up fast enough. The new position in sort of the, sorry, the new position, yeah. What you're saying is homeschool community liaison is the same as the school community engagement coordinator in the budget book?
Yes, yep, I used the wrong
Okay.
term. Yeah, it's the same.
Okay.
It's the
I just
same
want to make
position.
sure I linked those together. I did notice that and I was curious about it. So it sounded
Yep,
like it
no,
was the same thing. So
it definitely is. I'm glad you said that because I'm going to have to make the change. I'm bringing that liaison word over from Winterlaw. we called ours a liaison.
Got it.
So new staffing, again, the academic center coordinator, which has been extremely successful this year. Our 2 security officers are 2 part-time positions, 19 hours each. Those were formerly our SROs. The increase of 0.6 in world language, which is actually just, it's an increase that was already incurred this year. And then the new position of the engagement counselor. And then you'll also notice that under athletics, there is a request for 4 assistant coaching positions. Originally, the request was for 8 assistant coaching positions. But in conversations with Dan Uriano, we prioritized soccer, boys and girls soccer, and softball and baseball. The numbers on those teams, really require a second adult to help support and supervise and make sure that students have the attention that they need. And that was a request that was important to Dan. So just things to consider: estimating a slight increase in our students for next year as we move to as we shift to personalize our student-centered instruction. We want to try and maintain lower class sizes so that students receive the feedback that they need to improve and show progress. Past 3 budgets, there was an elimination of certified social studies teacher, English, math teacher positions. Those were by attrition, so through retirements. We did choose not to rehire it, or not to rehire, but not to fill the ag ed teacher position that was vacated by retirement for this year. And in doing so can still keep our class sizes reasonable. There will be we're looking toward a one-to-one technology program implementation for next year. And then our continued work in progress in equity, inclusion as it relates to PD and curriculum development are big considerations moving into next year's budget season. And under capital, we budgeted $250,000 for capital, which has been kind of the trend over the last few years. Of that, 157 is maintenance. IT is 75,000. Security upgrades, that was a decision made in the administration prior to this year that we should continue to fund security upgrades at the EO campus by budgeting for $5,000 a year. In addition, if you recall back in the fall, again, because of the surplus from last year, EO's contribution to the Depot School Security Grant piece was able to be funded. And as a result, $37,000 was able to be put into security upgrades for the EO campus. So this will just continue to grow that that fund so that we can make the necessary security upgrades that we're going to need to in response to the decisions that will be made by the board regarding security over the next few months. And then athletics, $13,000 for field projects. And just kind of broke it down under maintenance what that $157,000 entails. Those are broken out in the budget book as well. Some of them are multi-year plans. And those are the big pieces.
Sharon, can I ask a question?
Sure.
I wanted to ask if we are anticipating or projecting for this coming year's budget any reduction in electricity costs because we're online, and if we've built that in. I noticed it looked like, at least in the summary, it said those numbers hadn't changed, but.
Yeah, we saw some increases, and I'm not sure if Dennis is on this call, but we saw some increases in some of our other utilities, not necessarily in the electrical. We were really conservative on the electricity because we don't have any numbers to support any drastic decreases. So it doesn't mean that it's off the table as an area that we might want to take a look at once we have a little bit more information. But we were a little leery to under budget that line based on the fact that we're not quite sure yet.
Yeah, I mean, it looked like, I guess I didn't look at the full budget book, but it looked like in the summary that it was just remaining flat on electricity.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, we would expect that there's going to be some reduction, whether we, however we deal with it. Just the hope is going to be some reduction.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, that's a question that as I look at the budget, and that was one question of is there a way at this point now that it's been up and running for a couple months? Is there a way for us to estimate what kind of savings?
To start getting a handle on that.
Yeah, start getting an average.
I had one other question. I had one other question. It's one I ask every year. Because the first year I asked it, we hadn't been doing it. So I keep asking it every year. And that is that we, in dealing with the Columbia tuition, we have put in the 1%. I mean, we are taking account of the 1% increase that their contract calls for every year. Is that right? Yes. Is that
I'm
right?
going with yes,
Okay.
but I am going to double check it because that is the first time the question has been posed to me.
That's the CPI index that we pushed to them earlier on.
And I think it's
Yes.
CPI
Yep.
or a minimum 1%. I
That
think, right?
you're right,
Yeah.
Charmaine. Thank you for reminding me because it was actually higher than the 1%.
Okay.
Sure, I have a question as well.
Mhm.
Sure, I'm taking notes on that one. So I was looking to just do a quick alignment between department, so your average class size in different departments and the FTE certification FTEs, right, over time. And so one is sort of careers and tech. There's a couple of class sizes that sort of stand out as having some change. Many, as you noted, are not really substantially changed, but there's two that did seem to stand out. One was careers and technology. So from 2018-19 to 2020-21, we went from 13 to 16.8, right, in terms of class size. So that's meaningful, right? It's material change. So if I go over to certified teacher count, I see we went from 7 down to 6, right? So, kind of what is our, what's our plan for that? It would seem like that would be an area that would be increasing over time. Where teacher down, there's been a trend from 8 to 7 to 6 in that area. I guess, do you have any insight in there?
I don't have time, but what it looks like is that based on the numbers that were in place, that probably is why they chose to not replace one position and to reduce a position, and that 16.8 may be a result of reducing a position and absorbing, the student average. But that's something that I would need to check on. It's also why, for this proposed budget.
Yeah, it's per class number, so it's hard to. Yep. Sorry.
Are you looking at this one? Or you're looking at
it doesn't look like that in the book, but it's something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, I think
So,
that's part of the
okay.
reason why we chose not to, even though there was a retirement, and that's kind of been a trend to not fill positions due to retirement, that this is an area that we wouldn't want to reduce anymore, that those class size numbers are starting to increase, and that we really want to make sure that we are providing our students with the choices that they're interested in, and actually meeting with CTE and talking about, how they want to grow their program and integrate with Ag Ed a little bit, that there were certainly courses that could be shared amongst those two departments as well.
Absolutely. Yep. Very good. Thanks.
Oh, Herb, are you trying to ask a question? You're muted.
There we go.
Oh, there you go.
You, in one of your slides, you mentioned a liaison person who's going to handle social and emotional problems. Is that a purchase service, or is that a permanent staff member that we're putting in there? And are they going to be located in the building 100% of the time, or just when needed?
So that particular position is intended to supplement on the security side. A lot of the feedback and the research that we've received in regards to the debate around SROs versus folks who are there to support social emotional wellness, that brought up the idea of a homeschool community engagement person or liaison. It is engagement person in your book, to be on campus every day and for it to be a permanent position. And that person would work with students both and families both out in the community and in the building, depending on what the needs were. So an additional person who would develop relationships with both the students and with the families, and help the families to engage possibly in community resources if they had some needs within the home.
Would students be referred to her or him through the guidance or through administration?
They could be. They could be. You know,
Mhm.
as when we look at, you know, when students exhibit behaviors, whether it's a negative behavior that gets them a discipline consequence, you know, generally that's a symptom of, you know, when if you've been an assistant principal, you know, you talk about frequent flyers and students that you see in your office all the time. And it usually is, you know, some sort of symptom, whether it's an academic symptom, a social emotional symptom, or just, you know, some area of support that may be beyond what a typical guidance counselor or school counselor would be able to offer. That this person, you know, we're looking at someone who might be a trained social worker, who might be able to either help provide services themselves that go beyond the academic school piece, or be able to help the families enlist the services of a professional in the community.
Okay. The other question I have is in regard to textbooks.
Mm-hmm.
In going through your budget, it looks like the amount of money allocated for books is less than 1%, and it's kind of a flat figure. Is that because we're using computers and other paper?
Yeah,
in
there's
classes?
there's more use of the technology resources, and textbooks in general being used as a resource rather than the curriculum. There's really, you know, a realigned focus on the fact that, you know, even a textbook, sometimes by the time when you talk about the traditional textbooks, by the time we actually, you know, pilot them, vote on them, purchase them, they may be out of date. So there's a variety. Using a textbook as a resource is great. Where you do see some increases in our textbook lines, or in, like I said, is in the social studies department, and in English, English and social studies actually, where they're increasing their literacy options as it relates to equity and diversity of our students, and really making decisions, curricular decisions, and making literacy and literature choices based on the equity piece.
Karen, sorry, were you done, Herb?
Yes. Yes, thank you.
Go ahead, Sarah.
Okay, I just wanted to ask if you're using ebooks with maybe links to videos.
I am going to have to get back to you on how. I'm sure that there are classes that do. You know, the AP books, even the AP textbooks generally come with an ebook component. I don't have an exact number on how many of our courses are actually utilizing full ebooks.
Okay, thank you.
Another staff census question area that stands out is the building and campus monitors went from 3 to 4. Is that sort of part of a collective strategy in concert with the engagement coordinator and any SRO changes anticipated?
Though that is specifically the SRO. So when they moved from being, they were employees of the town, when we absorbed them into our budget, they became our,
Okay.
so that because each of them, they're half-time, so they're one FTE together.
Got it. Okay, that's where they hit. Okay. Thanks.
Sharon, I have, I think, 3 questions. So the first one with the community engagement coordinator, did you say the background would be as a social worker?
We've discussed, we haven't put the, well, we didn't want to be premature and create a job description, but that's something that we would work on with the personnel committee. But with Lou and I, we've been talking about what's the profile of the person, what's the experience that we're really looking for, and the demeanor of the person that we're looking for. And so we'd be looking for someone who's a social worker. Lou's reached out and talked to actually connections that he has through DCF to say, what could a job like this look like? And even reached out so far as to ask, is there a program with the department that we could align with? But I think we all know that DCF is probably as overextended as they can be right now. And so, but someone with those qualifications would be what we'd be looking for.
Because I think one of my concerns for kind of reentry is mental health of our students. So would it be good if someone could serve in both capacities? Because I was kind of thinking, could the safety officers do more of the home connection and then have somebody else to help with the mental health aspect?
Yeah. And it's really, you know, one of the things that, you know, having been an administrator who went to homes, you know, when I as assistant principal or principal, I would do home visits or dean of students, more so as assistant. We'd go to homes and I would always go with our SRO. But I was the person going to the door. As soon as a police car pulls up, it really did send a little bit of a, you know, it was very standoffish. The families were very standoffish, just for whatever reason through their experiences. And so I think there needs to be that balance, you know, that maybe the social emotional piece in the building is definitely an area that we're looking for, but we would also like that person to have that connection and be able to go to the home where parents and students are happy to see them and inviting them in and really, in some cases, allowing themselves to be somewhat vulnerable to accept support.
Erin, has the school psychologist position been filled?
It hasn't.
Okay.
It's going to get reposted
Okay.
within the next couple weeks. We're looking to update the job description to match and include the piece on diversity and equity.
Okay.
So my other question is there additional funding with ESSER? Like, is there ESSER 2 that we're expecting?
Yes. So the ESSER 2 money, we're getting about $393,000 in ESSER 2 funding. The portal will open. They're thinking on or about March 1st, and then it's going to be due. Although they said that they're going to be flexible with it. It'll be due about a month later. In theory. So Lou and I have already started talking with our department heads to brainstorm, and I've spoken with Dennis. So, you know, looking forward to next year, you know, what are, you know, our PPE needs and those pieces, but really the bulk of that funding really should be on student programming. And what are we providing to students and with students and families to fill the gaps. And this is not a one shot, you know, we're going to fix it in one shot. It's ongoing over the course of next year and into the following year. What can we do to make sure that students are not being punished for circumstances that have been completely out of their control? And so we're in the process of putting those action plans together and thinking about what that kind of summer programming, vacation academies, what shifts we need to make in, you know, how do we bring our freshmen in next year? How do we reacclimate our current freshmen who've never really had a real true transition to EO? You know, what can that experience look like with a fresh start for next year? And then how are we changing our approach to instruction in the classroom so that as we see those gaps, that we're filling them in real time? And what supports do teachers need to make that happen? So those are all of the questions that are hanging out there for really brainstorming on what the programs look like.
Could the community engagement person be funded through that?
They could be. It could be, but that's a one-shot deal. And I worry that if this is truly an ongoing need, that how do I put this? I thought about it. I didn't think about it. But I really want to make sure that if this is something that we're saying we need and we need for the long haul, that it's not going to be dependent upon the money that may or may not be there. It might be hard to get a qualified person as well if they realize that the position is purely grant funded, that they may not be willing to leave where they are to come work for us.
Okay. And then my last one was, if you can, I'm sorry, I know you've done this, but can you explain the tech students, how that's increased, like the transportation to the technical schools? Do those count in the town's numbers?
Mm-hmm. It does. So when we look at our projected numbers for next year, we're looking at, Charmaine and I went round and round, around with figuring this all out. So we have our October 1 enrollment numbers. You know, during that time, we know that these numbers fluctuate. Kids leave, they come, that happens. So the numbers that were projected from October 1, we've used to set some guideposts along the way. Along with that, now we know exactly how many projected 8th graders are coming in from our sending schools. So in projecting what the town contributions are, it's based on how many actual 8th graders they have coming in, that they've told us they have coming in, as well as how many seniors are projected to graduate, so that we know what that actual number is. But you know, as we've seen in looking at the numbers, you know, what they started with for a number in one calendar year may look totally different than, you know, how many students have actually come in from that school. I'm actually amazed at how much movement there is, because I get an email every time a student withdraws. And very often it's a transfer from one sending town to the other, and there's give and take between all of the sending towns frequently. So the sending towns get, they pay per student. Some of those students then choose to go to a tech school or to a magnet school, and then we have to pay, the region pays for them to attend.
And so what we're paying, I mean, but by being calculated in the town's numbers, we're paying the full EO tuition
Yes.
for that student. Okay.
Right,
And
which
so-
may be more or less than what the actual tech or magnet school tuition is.
Right. Okay. And then is there a way to know, like, this increase of 30 kids from Willington, how many are tech students? Like, it just seems like such a big swing, and I don't remember a large class coming through like that.
When I called Phil, because as soon as that number came across in December, I was on the phone with Phil to say, you know, I know you're starting your budgeting, and are you aware? Is there a bubble? Is this going to be a huge surprise for you? It
wasn't a surprise. We knew it was coming.
Yeah.
So it's this current 8th grade is 30 students larger than our graduating class?
This year's projected number is that the increase in the number of 8th graders in Willington, along with any increase in the number of students who've come in. And again, Charmaine, correct me if I'm wrong here, the increase in the number of students who have transferred in since that time as well.
Okay.
So it may not, and I think that sometimes that was a sticking point for me as I'm looking at, you know, the actual number of 8th graders versus that number, and it had to do with the movement of non-8th grade students.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
You might be graduating a small class too of seniors, right? That would make the offset exaggerated, right? If you have a small senior class, you know.
Yeah.
So possible.
Sharon, in relation to that, the numbers for Wellington were 30 new students. Mansfield had 37. Percentage-wise, I think Mansfield was 6.7, and Wellington was about 14%.
Yeah.
But when it comes to the percentage change, it was Ashford was down. Mansfield was around 2%. Wellington was 10%. But in the amount of money involved, maybe you can run through that. I was trying to figure out it looks like Wellington is paying an increase or a change of 401,000. Mansfield has 238,000. Although you have more students.
Let me take a look. Are you on?
More students
are you
in
on page
Mansfield
C?
than,
Are you on
than
page
in
C10?
Wellington.
Are you on
In
page
Wellington,
C10?
I mean, it would seem to me that Mansfield should be paying, well, the per pupil cost you said was around $18,500, but it doesn't work out that way when you're figuring the percentages involved here. And I think I know the reason for it, but I'm not quite sure.
Yeah, and again, Charmaine might be able to help me. I think it has to do with the fact that the percentages are based on the ratio of
Your allocation. But,
Yeah, that's probably it, but you have 37 students and Mansfield is paying 236 and Wellington has 30, which is less, and we're paying almost double. You know, when I go back to Wellington, I have to explain this to my constituency, and I'm sure there's an answer for,
Yeah,
for
let's
it.
look in, let's huddle on that, Charmaine, and see if we can wrap our brain around what you're asking so that we can chunk it out for you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? So we are looking, I think, at, well, we have a meeting next week for our regular board meeting. And our
Before you
next-
get to that, Sharon, let me,
Sure.
Herb, just in thinking about it, without even looking at percentages, if you have 500 and something kids and you add 30 something to it, the percentage on that is going to be less
I know it.
than if you have 180 kids and you add 37 to that. So that's one place right there where the percentages are going to be different. They're not going to be directly correlated to the number of students because you're not going in with equal number of students. So you're not going to end up with equal number of percentages in terms of what's going to change.
I understand that, but the per pupil cost is 18,500 per student, which when I look at it, I'm saying, well, you have 37 students, you multiply that times the per pupil cost per se, and then you multiply 30 times the 18,000, it doesn't come out exactly the same, but I know what you're saying.
But yeah, but the per pupil cost isn't based upon what town, they're based upon total number of enrollment.
Total number and percentages.
Right.
Mm-hmm. So I think our next budget review meeting looks like it is on March 9th.
Oh, good.
So we'll be able to come back at that point. Is there any, double checking on our, on our numbers, Wellington, and just kind of breaking that out for the good of, for our families that are watching too. The other question.
Sharon, I'll bring one up while you're looking.
Sure.
One of the things that will consistently come up as part of any budget review is, are there areas where we have an opportunity, if need be, to cut?
Mhm.
And one of the questions that would then come to you would be, have you looked into this? Are there areas, if it comes up, where, if necessary, we could begin to examine the possibility of cuts?
So for the next meeting, to kind of have that conversation? Because I definitely have, in the back of my mind, and in going through the budget more times than I can count, really looking at areas that that may have the least impact on the student experience.
And I'm not advocating cuts, just so you know. I'm not but it has been a consistent feature of when we go through the budget process. Are there places where we could look at a little bit more closely and maybe examine whether or not do we really need this, and can we do it out for this year? And then also, if you can do it without it for this year, what is going to be the impact next year? It doesn't make sense to cut something if you're going to double it the following year.
Right.
But it's always been a question that's come up.
Yep, and it's a good one. So I will be prepared to have that conversation at our next meeting. There's already some savings off the top, like I said, depending on what the outcome is of our bus contracts. Some savings off the top there that I think will be helpful. But again, depending on, I can bring options to the board as far as prioritization is concerned. And again, knowing and having worked with you all for even just this short amount of time, knowing that your expectation is for it to have the least negative impact on our kids.
Yeah, and on all 3 towns where we can do it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to speak up because, last year it was Ashford, this year it's Wellington, and you look at that percentage increase and it's
2
pretty
years ago was Mansfield.
Yeah, so I mean, and I don't know, we have done that in the past too, Jim, and maybe that's after the next meeting because we need to get an idea from Wellington, how big of an increase can you take, and then start. We've always had those numbers that show if you reduce the budget by this much, this is what it does to each town. To get this town down to that percentage, you'd have to cut this much. Is that feasible? So
Yeah.
We'll do that again, and it's still painful, and it will still be painful for whoever's but maybe a little less, less painful if we can do it.
And that's the piece. I can tear it out for you in regards to what's kind of a prioritization list that has tiers of percentage decrease.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Yeah, that sounds like it. So that's our presentation for tonight, and then we all have our homework for next week. Did we get any kind of public comment or anything? Did we get any emails or anything from coming in from outside?
I think that we lost, hold on one second, I'm just going to check the Google Sheet. I think we lost Mindy. I know her internet was a little wonky.
Actually, she's still there.
There's no way
Oh, is
that I
she?
can open anything. Yeah.
Oh, but
sorry.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah, I'm not seeing anything on
She's there.
if there is anything though, we can certainly, Mindy, if you're not able to open it to see, we can certainly deal with it at the next meeting.
The last time I checked, there were no public comments.
Okay.
Yeah. And I don't see any right now either, but certainly we'll have that opportunity at the next meeting too. So for anyone who's watching right now, if there's questions that come up, they can certainly put it into the public comment
Exactly.
Google Doc. We tend to use the same Google Doc, right, Mindy?
Yes, every time.
From meeting to meeting. So even if they put the question in tonight, we'd be opening the same document next week.
Okay, good.
Awesome.
Okay.
Thank you so much.